Welcome to Closing Conversations, a show for founders, leaders, and sellers who win together. I'm Max Notis. On this episode, I'm joined by Rob Gibbons, a sales leader who proves that great leaders belong in the trenches. Rob has scaled teams, led companies through growth and transformation, and coached sellers directly at every stage of the process. We dig into what it really means to lead from the front, including why leaders should still pick up the phone, how to coach at scale without losing the personal touch, and the pipeline gut check that every seller needs to hear. If you don't have your champion sell, are you really going to close the deal? Whether you're a founder, a sales leader, or a rep looking to sharpen your game, this conversation is full of practical, hard-earned insights. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Closing Conversations. I am really looking forward to this one. Rob Gibbons is with me today. He's someone I instantly connected with, not just because we both come from Bergen County, Waltham, Wellesley, those worlds, and not just because we're both big sports guys, but because we see sales leadership through the exact same lens. Rob has led and built sales teams at scale, but what really stands out is how he's never left the trenches. He's the kind of leader who still makes calls, he still coaches people one-on-one, and he keeps the playbook sharp by being in the action. So, Rob, it's great to have you here. Why don't you kick off? Tell me a little bit about yourself, your background, your philosophy, and what's going on.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you, Max. And yeah, instant connection once we started talking the last couple of weeks. Background is I went to college to play basketball, was fortunate enough to play professional basketball overseas for about 4.5 years. After that, after 9/11, started working in New York City, going to graduate school for psychology. So sales job during the day, graduate school at night, and then bartending on Friday and Saturdays for extra cash here and there. And then was in the sales job for a little while in the city selling office supplies. Got an opportunity to do the medical device job with Johnson & Johnson, and then built a company within Johnson & Johnson with some friends of mine, one of which is still best friend of today. One of my best friends today taught me everything I know in sales. And then we turned that from 5 guys doing about $2 million in revenue. Within 5 years, there were about 40 guys doing about $60 million in revenue. But what we learned and what I've used ever since is that it's not so much the product or the company and such, it's the craft of what we do, the sales and building relationships. And then I met my wife. We were talking earlier about where we lived. My wife's from Boston. Went up there to do it on my own, just to recreate the system. And then did some contracts for some really big medical companies, Zimmer Biomet, Stryker and such. After a while, got into technology because I spent so much time in the operating room, built a startup with some really smart guys around an EHR for anesthesiologists. And I know I'm sounding like that because I'm one of the founders, but it was way ahead of its time because it could easily communicate with any legacy EHR in the system. It was outstanding. And I learned how to sell it, went to business school in between in Boston as well, and then took it all over the world as a pilot. Promised my wife that, after 3 years, if it's not a going concern, that I would start to get back to the real world and do that. So after 3 years later, after burning through all my capital, her capital, our savings, borrowing a couple bucks from her dad, I was kind of like, okay, it's time. So went back into, I had to get broken down again from the same guy who started the medical device company with, the J&J, my friend, took me on, gave me a job on one of the companies that he was running at the time. And I was selling eye drops door to door in a suit, having gone to business school, HBS, program at HBS. So it was very humbling. At the same time, I needed it more than ever. And around that time, met with these IO psychologists that tested us, personality traits and everything. And with a psych background and just being obsessed with the human condition, I got into that and built a playbook with that and business and sales in mind. And I've been using that ever since. And from that training, I think that was in 2015. By then, you fast forward a couple years later, I'd been promoted 5-6 times. I've been a 2-time CRO, had a couple exits. Yeah, I still use the same playbook that I had before, only it's getting better each year. And we're able to do it faster. And now I've gotten to the point where I've got 3 or 4 like-minded people that I've been working with on 4 or 5 companies. And we just decided recently to build our own agency. So I'm
not far off from what we're doing over here.
Exactly. Yeah. Trying to keep up with you.
We see things very similarly. Like, there are 2 things that you just said that sparked something. One, I feel like whenever you talk about the best hiring practices, the best bona fide, IO psychology, it all comes back to it. 100%. And yet it's so funny how it's still such a nice to have and not a needs to have.
Yeah.
But it's wild. It's wild to me that this actually works, produces the right results, the right, all this stuff. Great. The other thing, that you and I really connected on was actually coaching those right people and really
Yeah.
putting like your money where your mouth is, and not just saying like, all right, here's your book of business, go figure it out. But hey, I'm going to
Yeah.
work with you. And how that
Yeah.
gains loyalty, that gains appreciation, that gets people figuring it out faster. It makes them, more formidable internally, externally, everything. And
Yeah.
like you said, kind of to forget about what you're even selling. If you have that going, you can put anything in front of the
Yeah.
right group of people and they're going to make an impact with it.
That's right. And one of the things that it's a great point, because one of the things that I focus on, because I've gotten to the point where early on people said, well, how did you make the jump from med device to tech? And I said, well, they kind of led into one another. The tech was from the technology in the operating room. So it's not like I just went and leaped. However, after that, and I got rebuilt and broken down and rebuilt, I went into tech pretty hardcore because one, it paid extremely well, but there were these massive sales teams with these new technologies that people were hiring them, and they hired them because they were good at what the other spot they were. Meanwhile, there weren't very many good training facilities, like companies that were doing hardcore training. There's a few on the East Coast that I was very privy to be a part of. And even from the peripheral, I used to ask friends of mine that went into the tech sector, hey, if they have a good training, send me the manual. And people still do this to this day. Send me the materials that you got. And I just study them. But it's interesting because so many people are promoted to managers or higher levels. They inherit these positions of power. And what people don't realize is that you can't expect people to do different jobs if you don't train them differently. And my thing was, I just personally love the coaching aspect of it. I still do that to this day. I coach a couple of now I limit it, but I have a few executives I've been coaching for a while. And in our model that we're doing now at the agency, the training and the coaching is very big with the teams, because once you build that system and stick to it and deviate here and there, but it really reproduces the same results. Yeah. And at the core of it, like we were talking earlier, when you focus on the psychology of it, it's all based on self-management. So you really can root out pretty quickly who's going to really step up and bring the best to the table. And can you bring that to fruition? So my promise when I work with people is I'm hiring them. I say, listen, we think you have the tangibles to do this. If you're willing to keep that work rate above, normal and be a sponge, my promise to you personally is that within 6 to 12 months, if you stick with us, you'll have such a skill set and a process, you'll be product or company agnostic. And if we stay with us, we're blessed to keep you for the next couple of years, great. But anywhere else you go, these skills will be your go-to. And that's happened. And then the more of an audience you build that you've had success with that with, then the word kind of travels, you know what I mean? And people start buying in easier, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And, I'll tell you from again, similar philosophy, but from my experience, when I started training people, it was very much, I wanted to provide what I didn't have, like when I was up and coming. And so for example, like honesty, like I came through this program, you had to make 40 sales in 40 days where you were cut. And at the time, the person I was working, like he didn't know the program well. And it's, do I have to worry about the job or not? You can never get a straight answer. So when I would have new reps that were working for me, I would always say like, listen, if you've got what it takes, like I'm going to be the first person to tell you. If you don't have what it takes, I'm going to be the first person to tell you. And the other thing that I'll say to people is, here's the deal. Like if you pump your motor at 100 miles an hour, I guarantee that I will steer you from A to B and that you won't be going in circles. That's my job. Your job is to keep the motor going. And then because of that, I mean, we were talking about this as well. Like when you go through something tough with people, you really bond with them.
100%.
It's almost like the hazing mentality.
Yeah.
So we go through this, you're getting rejected. You're having self-doubts. You don't know if you'll be able to do this. I'm begging you. I know that you can do this. Trust me. And then these things work. They click. We're thriving. We're vibing. You're going places. And now all of a sudden you have this unbelievable skill set to hit the roof with whatever you want to do. And I'm beyond proud. My ego is stroked because I was right. And I was able to bring you there. And both of us now want to keep doing it and repeating the process.
100%. And that's why I think we're both in the same mindset. That's why I've always tended to favor hiring former athletes, because usually they've had that degree of adversity where they got kicked in the stomach and they had to pick up and move on. And we both were former athletes. You know that I don't miss the actual baskets or playing or whatever. I do miss being on the road. I do miss being in the locker room. I do miss being in a gym where 20,000 people hated you and you only had you and the 11 guys on the team. That's the part where your backs are against the wall. And if you can transfer that into an environment of business, you're really cooking with gas, because people need to know that you've done this job before with just like they're doing. And what I saw is that early on, I was guilty of this too, and I see this a lot. Everybody I was managing early on, I was comparing directly to me. No, you got to do it my way. This way worked. You don't understand. I'm a manager now because I was the best sales guy. I bought in a third of the company's revenue the last 2 years. You can't do that because when you're basically doing it, it's very linear, and you're not listening to what this person brings to the table. Now it's just, can I find and bring the best version of this person to the conscious level, and how long can I teach them to keep it there? Instead of saying, if you don't do what I do, you're not going to make it. That wears thin with people pretty quickly.
Yep. I'll say two things. One, I just have to, because I'm so proud of this. I play ice hockey. I had back surgery and shoulder surgery over the past couple of years, and I had my first game back this week, and I was terrified to go back. I'm like, am I going to get hurt? Did I lose shape? Like, am I going to be able to keep up? And I go into the locker room. The guys are so warm. It felt amazing. I get on the ice. I'm playing smart. And I ended up scoring the game-winning goal. And look at that. Like, but again, like that push through, like, can I do it? Can I do it? Like, reward. I can't wait. My next game's on Tuesday. Like, I'm counting the hours until it happens. Anyway, I had to throw that out for.
I have 3 sons and a daughter, and another girl that lives with us, and they're all they're all getting to be big time basketball players, but they're young. But they're at that point where they're quicker and faster than dad. Not that I was ever faster or quick, but I mean, I hadn't played in a long time, and then I'm playing with them, and I can't make a shot. I'm slow. I can't run anymore. My son is stronger than me. This kind of thing. But then, at one play, I throw a dime right through my one son's legs. My other son catches it, lays it in. And there's that little thing, that little twinge in your head, like, still got it. So I completely relate to what you're saying.
Well, so I want to make another analogy, because this kind of goes along with what we were saying, about training people about, no, they don't have to be just like you. And we talked about this in the last episode, but there are a lot of companies, I've been a part of them, where they say, oh, you've done this before, you've hit a quota of this nature before, you've been in SaaS, great, you're the person. And it's like, wait a minute, I'm saying this from where I've had bad experiences, and you go aboard, and I said, this is a couple of times, I said, hey, I'm new to your industry. Is that going to be a problem? And they say, no, it's not going to be a problem. And the truth was, it was a huge problem, because no one was going to sit down and have teach me how it went, or have the patience for it. And then they're saying, it's month 4, where are you? And it's like, listen, I can sell, but I don't know what I'm selling. And this sucks for absolutely everything. Even like, there are a lot of good sports analogies where, like, who am I thinking of? Like, is there a few of them now where, like, they didn't play the sport until like 2 years ago, and now they're like one of the best in the league, kind of a thing. Or like, oh wait, this is what it was. Roger Federer, like, he didn't start playing tennis until he was like 14. They looked at, it was a book someone was telling me about, the German soccer team that won the World Cup in like 2014 or something like that. The average person started playing soccer at 16. And they were saying how by being well-rounded and then coached properly, you could bring quite a lot more to the table. And how a lot of companies, they'll look for your pedigree and say, great, you can do. The analogy I made on the last one was the Jets. Like, they take a new quarterback every year and say, great, he'll fix the team. And it's like, you've got a terrible organization around him.
Yeah, whereas exactly.
If you take someone for potential and you put in the investment and the patience of training them, they're going to be more bought into the organization. They're going to be better at what they do. They're going to deliver more. And then as you bring more folks in, you're setting like, that's proper culture. You're setting like the real culture of we give, we work together, we work hard, as opposed to, hey, we'll buy you drinks once a quarter.
Yeah.
No, great.
Spot on. And sports.
You're telling me I'm going to have to drink because I'm going to be so miserable.
Right.
Okay,
and
fine.
sports is constantly putting in, I feel like sports today, even though I'm only very limited on how much I watch, but I still keep my finger on the pulse of college basketball and pro basketball. But it's interesting because sports is still the great equalizer in that. I could rip off examples in my head that I see consistently reminding us that, yeah, there's people that come through the system and they're born and bred to do this thing, and they do it exceptionally well. But then there's also people that, to your point, they started way later, but they picked it up because they were rounded, they were good athletes and such. I mean, look at the Eagles. I don't like to say the Eagles, I'm a Giants fan, but they have a guy, if I'm not mistaken, never played a down of football in his life until like a year or two ago. He was a rugby player, I forget his name, but the defensive coordinator found him, bought him out, and he won a ring. I use an example. I grew up in Rockaway in Jersey, and I still have the same 5 best friends I've had since I was literally this high. And I always use this one example. One of my best friends, I just saw him recently, didn't play a down of football until the 8th grade. And they couldn't even foster a team in that side of Rockaway early on. So we only played in a couple games. And so his first real year of football was our freshman year in high school. And didn't get recruited out of college, went to prep school for a year, ends up going to BC, and then played 3.5 years for the Jaguars. You know what I mean? Like,
oh, great.
It's like, yeah, the girl, I use another example. We have this lovely girl that lives with us from Ireland, right? Her family's originally from the Congo. She's from South Limerick, Ireland. And she's a remarkable story where my other best friend, who I played in the Irish national team with, a guy named Kieran Quinn, to this day, the best enterprise sales guy ever seen. That's another story. But He found her over there. He helps Irish kids get over here and get opportunities in the States. And he saw her because he was playing, his nephew was playing on one court, she was playing on another. And all of a sudden he sees this girl and she's moving the way she is at the size she is. He's like, hang on a second. Long story short, she's lived with us for the last 2 years, right?
Wow.
And she goes to the private school up the street, but there's a girl that was only playing basketball 4 years ago, maybe. She's an All-American and she's going to UConn next year to play. So it's like, when you think of college basketball, women's college basketball, that's the Mecca. You know what I'm saying?
That is absolutely the Mecca.
So that's why when I hear people say that, oh, he doesn't have the chops for it, or he doesn't do this, I'm always like, I try to hold back. Like even when I coach a little while, like I coach basketball and I coach my young son's team, my 4th grade son, and parents are like, yeah, he's pretty good, but let's face it, he's not going to be a D1 player. And I'm like, hang on a second. I said, first of all, he's in 4th grade. And then I say, without fail, I'm like, I always ask him, I said, so what makes you say that? Wow. I said, did you ever play? Well, no. So what do you know? How do you know what a good looks like?
Oh my God.
What I mean? And they're like, wow, I just know. No, you don't. You really have no
with
idea.
that attitude, he'll never be.
Correctly. So as long as he stays far away from you, he'll be fine.
Yeah, no. Keep telling him that.
Yeah. And my wife always tells me, I'm blunt is the only language I know. It's one of the good things in sales. It's not always great when you're the 4th grade basketball coach, though. So
Rob, I want to bring something up. I've referenced this story to like 7 people since we last talked like a week ago. We were talking about how a lot of salespeople, when they move up in the ranks from, SMB mid-market up to enterprise, that they get soft. They forget how to close. They think, oh, this is like more of a white collar sale. I can't push. I can't encroach. And as a result, they end up just probably putting in a lot of effort to get meet, and then just they wash away like the wind because they have no control. They have no claw in the deal. And you had mentioned that you were going over pipeline with your team. And somebody said, for example, they're like, oh, you're like, what's the close percentage on this? The guy says, I think there's like a 95% chance they're going to close this quarter. And you turned to him and you said, all right, who's your champion? They said, chief operating officer. And you say, all right, call a cell. The guy goes, right now? And he goes, yeah, call him right now. He gets totally tongue-tied. And you say, well, do you even have his number? Well, no. Why not? And I think that is such an unbelievable and proper way to manage a team, to run a team, to conduct a sale, because when you know that you've got the in, when you're really working it the right way, you can call them at any time. Hey, what's going on? Did I miss your call? Like, we're talking all the time. Like some of these people that I've closed deals with, we're texting while they're on vacation because I'm not a seller anymore. Like we're buddies. Like he knows I'm a Springsteen fan. He heard the band at his hotel play a Springsteen song. I was like, I got to tell Max because we like this. Like this is totally normalized. And if you're not doing that, you're doing like we were talking, you're being way hopeful. You're ignoring any red flags, and you're like sitting there just waiting to get mollywopped by heartbreak.
You've essentially lost control of the sale. And that's what a lot of
or you never had
guys, or you never had it. That's a good point too. But what I teach, what I coach, and what I've worked on, right, is a definition of influence. And influence is getting people to do what we want them to do for their reasons, right? Mm-hmm. So the best of the best, the ones I coach and train, they are great at letting the account know that it's controlling the sale, that it's in charge, it's doing all this. But the truth of the matter is, the best enterprise guys, the best salespeople in general, it doesn't matter what you're selling, they're always in control. And if at any point it deviates and they know that they've lost control of the sale, the good ones will click right away and push the pause button. Hey, you know what, Max, is it okay if I just hit the pause button here for a second? We haven't talked in a few days. The last time I spoke to you, we were supposed to meet on Friday. You were going to have that decision for me. It's now Tuesday. Instead of, some of them are reactionary. Like it was interesting. You name your company commission. I gave a talk a long time ago about salespeople fall into 2 realms when it comes to something that needs to get done. Do they go to commission or omission? And a lot of salespeople go to omission, like, oh, the worst thing you can tell me when we're talking about deals is I'm waiting to hear back. That's the one that basically, and my team knows as soon as a new guy comes in, and I say, well, where's the contract? Oh, it's on the COO's desk. I say, when's the meeting? When are you guys signing it together? When's he supposed to get back to you? When's the deadline? Oh, no, he's going to get back to me in a couple of days. The whole room will be like, oh God, here we go. And that's when I'll say, get him on the phone. So you can do that. And I have, like the gentleman I was telling you about, this Kieran Quinn, he's famous for that too. And I learned the hard way. Bob Rinaldi was one of the first guys that showed me that. I was in a boardroom meeting with him, pipeline meeting, and he said that to a guy. And it was like, wow, because it made perfect sense to me. If you're really lined up to your champions and you're really a resource for them and you've earned the right to ask for their phone number, the relationship has built itself to a different level. And when I say to guys, if you don't have a linear path to your champion, you really don't have control of the deal. You've already lost control of the sale. You just either you don't know it yet, or you know it and you don't want to admit it.
I think more of the time it's that you know it and you don't want to admit it because
Correct.
you're trying to hit a quota. You're trying to hit above a quota. Whatever it is, you've got to, Mark Messier said this in his book. He's like, there's a difference between motivation and inspiration, where motivation, you have to babysit people. You have to keep kicking them to do it. If you inspire them, it takes care of themselves because we're all doing this for a different reason. Like, you might be doing it for the fancy lifestyle. You might be doing it because your parents wanted you to do this forever. Like, as a salesperson, why do you care about your quota? You may not want to get fired. You may be looking to buy a house and like you've already started depending on that money you've already calculated the commission and you're already kind of counting on it. And so then they say, all right, we're going to meet to sign. And then they kick it off. And then you don't want to admit it. So in your head, you've been saying, oh, he'll get back to me. Oh, he'll get back to me, or he'll get back to me. And then when you go and say to the team, it's all like painfully obvious to them, but to you, you've been saying this in your head for so long, they'll get back. Of course they'll get back. But if they sat down in a therapist's office and talked about this for 5 minutes, they'd be like peeling their skin off.
Well, and that's what the best leaders do, is that they won't just flat out accuse and bring out the stick. You've got to walk people through like, okay, if this person, one of the biggest things on enterprise deals, and I coach differently because if I can't get that person or bring them to the point that they understand what they're doing is not going to keep continuing and adding to their success, it's going to hold them back, it's a different story. If I just automatically tell people things, people don't trust you, right? You got to understand that there's a wall that goes up in the head, right? Even when you ask people questions. But if you just say, well, you need to do this, you need to do this, instead of asking them questions like, well, what about this? And the guy that, for instance, I remember the first conversation where I said, well, get him on the phone. And I said to him, I said, listen, well, what about the other champion? Get him on the phone, get her on the phone. And didn't have one. I said, this is a $7-8 million deal and you've got one point of contact? And I said to him, I said, listen, man, if this gentleman, God bless, I hope it never happens, it's just saying, but if this guy were to get hit by a bus on the way to work, the deal's done. And when you let them know that, like, you've got one thread that you're so dependent on, all of a sudden people start to panic. And that's okay, because you'd rather have them learn like that than vicariously saying, oh, you make sure you talk to this, this, and this. If you don't, your deal's not real, that kind of thing. But a lot of people, to the point we made earlier about the emotion, they get happy feet. And you find that in enterprise deals, a lot of because of what I call velocity, right? Velocity comes into effect because these guys are running these deals that take 6 to 9 months, and people get fatigue. They get deal fatigue. And, if you're meeting every week, even you're saying the same things in the pipeline, don't get me wrong, it's also the fault of leadership, because you get what you tolerate, right? And if I got a guy who's running a massive deal, but every week he comes in 2 weeks in a row, he tells me the same damn thing, I'm like, hang on a second. What's your real take on this? And that's where people really have to get themselves, like, you have to line up those milestones, like what has to happen? How many multiple champions can you build? Can you find other pains? Otherwise, if it's just the one nod, you're kind of stuck.
I want to bring something else up that you said, because I felt this too, where, you bring up that, it'll close in 2 weeks. Why? Because I'm praying to God they do, right? There's two ways to handle that as leadership. And I think this comes back to like what we were saying, where you could feel if a seller's desperate, you can feel if a leader's desperate. If I bring that up and it's clear, like, this isn't happening and you've been really hopeful, the leader, you can either show me the back of the hand and be like, it's not happening. You're wrong. And then listen, I'm trying to do right here. Like, I'm trying to make deals happen. And clearly I missed something along the way. Maybe I don't know how to do this. Maybe there's whatever it may be. And you can't let as a leader, you can't let this slide. You can't just say, okay. And this is how you're reporting, exactly like you get what you tolerate. But there's a way to either just kind of like smack the person and then they're cowering towards leadership all the time. And this is a terrible, toxic environment. Or you say, let's say then they miss the deal and then they miss their quota and they have to go on some sort of a PIP where you can then address them and you're making the call. Does this person really have what it takes or not? And you say, listen, you're on a PIP. Nobody wants that. I get that. But here's where you missed this. And I'm going to help you on your next deals to make sure this doesn't happen. And so that way, if you do everything we're saying and you keep the straight and narrow, you're going to get out of this PIP and you're going to be making more money. Like, it's an opportunity to garner trust, to up level somebody, as opposed to you're pulling your hair out. Like, everybody's pulling their hair out because this deal didn't come through.
Yeah. That's where the growth happens, right? So when I do pipeline meetings, right, and I have it like this, it's gotten simpler now to where I have commits and best case. And it depends on the transactional method of this. If it's a long sales cycle, it's a different story sometimes. But usually if it's a little bit more transactional, in-month pipeline, quarterly pipeline, things like that. But let me just explain the difference between the commit and the best case. Commit is gun to head. If this isn't going to close this month, you're going to pull the trigger, right? I know it sounds dramatic, but it just shows these guys. So what we do is when we do pipeline meetings, I have one job for my entire team. My job is to be the red team. The red team is that I've got to poke holes anywhere I can to where I think you're not looking at or you're not thinking of or you're not doing. So when you do that, and you do that in a methodology where you're not accusatory or you're not running this gotcha culture, you're asking the right questions. And having done this so long, you know what to ask. What they start to do, what the culture and the team starts to do on its own, they start to prepare themselves and run their deals around what would he poke holes in. You know, if I was Gibbons and I know that I got to bring this deal to Gibbons, what is Gibbons going to ask me? What is he going to say I don't have? So the people that are in these meetings and they see how the other people respond to, hey, where is this deal? And they button up and know everything, they over prepare. And when they're over preparing, they're thinking ahead, which is the best thing that salespeople can do, right? Is anticipate. And when you get them to the point where they know what you're going to ask and they know that they're going to be on the hot seat, you know what? I know I bumped the closing date out a couple days. Here's why. The culture is already coursing itself. It's already correcting itself. That makes sense. But if you can't get them to realize why or understand why you're asking the questions you are and that they really benefit them, it doesn't benefit me. I need you to look at this deal this way because the way you were looking at it, you're just missing a couple things. We tighten those screws a little bit and your closing percentage and your success is just going to go through the roof. So that they anticipate what they need to do, you have a different animal, right?
Totally.
They're starting to learn.
And I'm even thinking, if it's this like the accusatory culture that we're talking about, you're going to get the people going, oh, it's going to close in 2 weeks because they're afraid to bring the honesty to you. Whereas as a leader, like you should be helping them. And that's the whole point of this is not to be auditing in a helpful sense or as opposed to the accusatory sense. But, if I trust my leader and they say, what do you think is going on? I'm more comfortable to say, I got to tell you, I'm not thrilled about what I'm seeing. And then I'm actually gaining credibility because I'm being honest as opposed to I just don't want you to smack me right now. And I am nervous that this deal won't close. I'm not an idiot. I know this too, but I just don't know how to handle myself in this conversation.
Yeah, it's a different type of leadership. When you're doing what we said, like when you're encouraging them to find what they need to do to get better, you have a completely different ecosystem. But when you're saying that, hey, if you don't have this, you're going to be punished, all of a sudden that creates really bad behaviors and all of a sudden they can become systemic. And you got guys cutting corners and just telling you what you think you want to hear because they don't have the right answer, but they don't want to be punished either, right? And then that culture over time eats itself because then guys aren't doing things for the right reasons or doing things not to get caught, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. This brings me even to a bigger point. I think it's both why we're doing what we're doing is I think that this exactly what we're talking about, this helpful leadership, hey, this is the way forward. I'm going to garner and I'm going to nurture your trust and I think since COVID, this is something that's been missing from sales teams that I think people don't know how to coach virtually. I think that truthfully, sellers are still tight. The economy hasn't figured itself out. So people are a little wary of what to buy. They don't know what the next few years are going to look like. And so with that, I think that leaders and teams, they feel more vulnerable. And then this plays down onto the salespeople. And then, you bring on a CRO, for example, their job is to close the big deals and to make sure the sales team is humming. They don't have time to do both. And so they close the deals and they say, what do you mean to the sales team? Like, what do you mean this isn't happening? And then you've got these, for example, 6, 12, however many, 40 salespeople who have potential, who joined your ship and put their trust into you, and they are vulnerable. Like they are not learning what they need to. They're not getting what they need from the company. And the onus is really being kind of passed down there. Whereas what we're saying is, if you really take a beat, treat these people how you'd want to be treated. Like, what are they going to, they're new to a company. They're going to need to know things that they don't know. They're pitching a new product. They're reaching out potentially to a new buyer. And, I hate when they say, oh, let's bring on people who have done this before. If they've done this before, why are they coming to you? Why aren't they still at their old company doing it? It's very rare that it's for an actually good reason that will benefit both of you. Maybe they wanted a promotion they didn't get. Maybe the company's tanking and they just loved this and have a book of business. I think that's more hopeful thinking. But realistically, if you do hire for potential and you put the work in to grow these folks, now again, like you said, it doesn't matter what you're selling. It doesn't really matter the economy. These are the people that believe that they're bought in and they're going to make it happen. And they're going to be honest with you when they're reporting it.
what's a bigger product of that as well is one is the honesty. The second one is they stay. Those are the people that are loyal. The people that come up through the farm system, the people that come up as early AEs or SDRs, BDRs and such, and they work with you and they evolve. Those are the people that, yes, I do think a large part of all salespeople's North Star should be money because we're all kind of loyal to our wallets, right? I understand that. But at the same time, this generation that we're working with now, the new crop of people that are coming out there, yes, money's absolutely important to them. But when they're learning and they're developing and they're evolving and they're making money, why would they ever leave? And that's why you hear that slogan, people don't leave companies, they leave people, right? Because if they're not learning, if they don't think that you have their best interest in mind at heart, if you're not helping them get better, if they're not learning, why would they stay, right? Because, and I think we both in this situation, I think I was telling you this before, it drives my wife insane, but I walked away from companies, and this is not recent, but in my career, I walked away from companies where I was making a lot of money, but I just wasn't learning. And it wasn't a good vibe. It was just close, or die. And that's it. And I could have stayed and made tons of money, but I wasn't going to get any better because to me, I'm always working at something as an audition for the next level up, right? If that makes sense. You're always auditioning for your next job and that keeps you at the top of your game. But if people are just being handed, hey, this is your quota, this is what you need to do, you're doing everybody a disservice because over time, that doesn't scale. We've both seen that firsthand.
Totally. And I have two things that I'm thinking off of this. One is when you do that and you have the people who are going to stay there, they're bought in, then the next people that you bring in, there's a trickle effect there. It transfers and they're helping because they've been helped. And now you've got a team that like loves working together, that loves being together, that when you say we're having a company event, they're not like rolling their eyes and be like, all right, I can stay for an hour. Like they're actually looking forward to it because like they want to hang with each other.
Something that you touched on that I do want to point out because it's a great point. And I think a lot of people are falling victim to it is that we just said, like, we don't think that there's as much culture built around the training and the coaching. And I do want to say that I think COVID had a lot to do with that. There's still so many companies now that are virtual. And I built a lot of sales teams, turned around a bunch of companies. I can tell you, I had to learn a completely new skill set doing it online like this, right? Because there's something to be said for doing it in person. When you see the same person every day in the office, you start to get used to how to read their body language, their tonality and stuff. But when you think about it, communication is broken down three ways. It's words, tone, and body language, right? And the order of importance is words account for 7%, tonality is 38%, and body language is 55%. Well, when you take out the biggest component being body language, because we're all sitting on a camera, you can get a little bit of it. It's nowhere near the amount you were getting when you're in person, right? And then what happens? Even worse, you don't have body language, and then a lot of salespeople take calls with no camera on. So now you just have tonality, right? So it's like I had to teach people how to really master that skill, how to really be good in person on the phone. But I had to do it for myself because how do I get a culture to start all driving in the same direction when it's just this, right? Because there's something to be said by sitting next to people in those meetings, in those trenches. And when we all got pushed and locked in our houses, whatever, it changed the game. And to your point, I think that's why guys like us building these new agencies and such, I think that's one of the reasons there's such a demand. Listen, I parted ways with my previous company not even 2.5 weeks ago. We've already signed 2 clients. One of them's large, one of them's early, where the exact thing that we're talking about, how do they train, build, and scale? And the problem, one of the issues is that the company's 100% remote. So if you're not used to doing that, you're running uphill, so to speak.
And I'll tell you, going along, I don't think, I think it's easy to demonize and say, oh, these people are bad and they're not training. I don't think that's their intention. No one's walking in and being like a Scooby-Doo villain and be like, oh, these meddling kids who aren't selling. No, I think they want to. I think that they don't know how. I think that they get overwhelmed. I think maybe they get put into a situation where they're stuck between a rock and a hard place and they have a number to hit and they have expectations and maybe they overpromise because they were in a situation or maybe it's not even any of that complicated. Maybe it's just, like we're saying, you don't know what to do. And I think that it's also very hard for a leader to turn to their company and say, listen, I'm having trouble. I don't have the time. I don't know exactly what isn't working, but it's not. And I'm really frustrated. And I think that the leaders who are poised to make an impact will have that conversation with their company and say, help me out. Maybe you can guide me. I'm talking to others, whatever it may be. And the leads where it's just inevitable disaster is when they don't say that, they continue to make promises to the company. It's just never going to happen. And you've got a lot of people that are on your ship and they have no idea that you've already hit an iceberg.
Right. And I teach people, like, what I've learned is that trust equals comfort over time, right? The longer you're with someone in certain situations, the more you start to trust them. Think of any relationship you've ever been to. That's why it's easy to talk about sales and relationships in the same comparison, because they're very, very similar, if not mirroring each other, right? If you just met potential the love of your life, would you really wait 5 days to call her? No, and you wouldn't do that. If you called her and she called you back, are you going to call her back right away? You're going to wait till, like, you wouldn't do that. So why would you do it in these situations? But I also think that one of the reasons why people have gotten a little bit leery or the trust hasn't been built that much is because, like, go back to what I said, trust is comfort over time. That means the more exposure you have with people, the more you are assessing in your head whether or not you're going to ride with them or not and trust them. And when you just have a virtual situation, it's pretty hard to do, right? That's why you've really got to get into what makes people drive themselves to the highest level they can.
You got to just prove that you, like, show that you're there. Don't say that you're there.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I've learned whenever I go into companies now, I mean, this has been the last several years, but the very first thing I'll do is to jump into a deal, because I've done it early on in my career. I said, hey, I'm the new sheriff. This is how we're going to do it. And then you have people that are questioning the way you do it, or they're questioning you, or there's people that are questioning both. Either way, you're making it that much harder. So my thing is, and a guy named John Kaplan said this, who runs Force Management. He said this years ago to me when I met him. He said, the best thing you can do as a leader that's going to take over a big team is to be the same before you can be different. And I've applied that to the last several places I've been. It's always worked in the sense that I don't try to change anything early on. I try to jump in deals that are stuck and let the rep run it. And if I can lend a help or any kind of helping hand or help do something or move it along or spot something that they didn't spot, every time I've done that now, it's gotten me closer to the team, and they'll say, hey, yeah, this guy gets it. Instead of me just telling them, what's the new way we're going to do this, how we're going to do this. Because again, if you're telling people to do things, by nature, they're usually a little bit standoffish, no matter how good of a track record you carry. But if you get into the trenches with them, say, hey man, I'm just here. I know I got a title, I'm a CRO, but I'm here if you need me. This is your show. I want to see what we need to do.
See, I compare sales a lot to therapy. I go to therapy. And I always think, like, it's a salesperson. It's walking in as a leader. It's the same thing. If you go into a therapist's office, they don't go, shut up, don't say anything. I'm going to tell you how you're going to fix your life. Like, who the fuck are you? You know, like,
you don't know anything about me.
You tell me what's going, I'm going to sit here my first, however many, like, whenever I've gotten into a role as a leader, what are you going to do the first day? 30 days? I'm going to be a fly on the wall. Like, I'm going to hear, because then when I give the plan back, I can say, this is what you had mentioned. This is what you wanted. This is what I think based on my experience. It's not just a playbook's written for everybody, work for no one.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You've got to understand why it should matter to them. I always ask people, like, we'll lock the door when I first get to someplace, say, listen, no one is listening. It's just going to stay in this room, but I need to know what you love about what we're doing right now before I got here, and what's the biggest challenge. And it takes a little bit. You got to poke a little bit, but then when they start, and what they love about it is usually fluff. But when they start to get one or two people open up about their biggest challenges, and then the mindset kicks in where it's okay to say this, you really start to find out what's going on behind the curtain. And then only then can you really start to say, okay, well, hey, I can help with that. I've done that before.
Yep. You got to let their guard down. All right. I just got to call out. We are almost at time here, Rob, but I wanted you to just take a second, tell the audience what you're doing these days.
Yeah. So I parted ways with a recent company. I was the CRO for just over a year. And the company I was at, I ended up bringing in a crew of people that I've worked with now at like 4 or 5 companies. And we were always talking about getting together and doing things. And this was an opportunity to do it again together. And we had a massive amount of success in a short period of time. We generated 96 million in net new bookings in less than 11 months. And I do the sales, marketing and such, but I have a woman that is with us who is an absolute genius. She owns her own media company in our marketing. I have another colleague of mine who's an operations strategy guru, and another guy that's a data scientist. So we built our own agency, and we're literally in the last stages of about to launch probably before the end of the month. But we've already, knock on wood, we're very blessed. We've already signed 2 clients that we talked with previously that now heard that we're opening our own agencies, and they're on board. So yeah, that'll launch probably before the end of the month. It's called Achiever Capital, and it's basically go-to-market, similar to what you're doing. Go-to-market, revenue generation, sales ops, rev ops kind of thing, where we get in either the product market fit needs to be there, early stage, preferably product market fit, or even mid to late stages, taking things from 20 to 80, 30 to 80, or if there's an event that they want to build towards.
Good man. Well, good luck with everything.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, Rob, thank you for coming. This has been fantastic. We got to have you back.
Yeah, absolutely. And we got to get together soon.
Most definitely. All right. See you soon.
Have a good one, man.
And that's it for this episode of Closing Conversations. Big thanks to Rob for joining and sharing such direct, actionable lessons on leadership and sales. If you're building a team or thinking about how to stay sharp as you grow, this conversation is the one to revisit. If you enjoyed the episode, follow the show for more conversations with founders, leaders, and sellers who win together. I'm Max Notis, and I'll see you next time on Closing Conversations. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget, you can always catch us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for more episodes of Closing Conversations.